Hi folks, well, welcome to Ian Davis's session, Making Decisions. Well, who on earth made the decision that I was going to do this tonight? Wasn't a great decision, was it? No. Hey, there we go. Fine. So let me just tell you who I am first of all. So I am Ian Davis. I run Aylesbury Therapy for Kids, part of the NLP for Kids franchise, working with children these days across the country, actually, as opposed to just in my area, which is Aylesbury. So I work in Aylesbury, and I also work in a school in Reading. The school in Reading obviously is locked down, so there are 15 children there I work with, mostly of which I'm doing online at present. And I then do something like 400 or 500 appointments a year with children on a one-to-one basis, obviously all online. And yeah, it's good fun. Yeah, great, really good fun. So let's get on to what we're talking about tonight. So we are talking about making decisions, and generally we're talking about making those decisions as general decisions. So we're not going to talk about making decisions at work, because that's really another ball game. We're not going to do SWOT analysis and all that type of stuff. We're more talking about making personal decisions. That's really where we're at tonight. So let's just talk about some bad decisions that have been made over the years. So I'll just share my screen with you if I can. Let's have a quick look. So, can you see this? No one's talking to me, so I don't know. Yes, so I need to make an executive decision. I need to decide who to blame my mistake on. Yeah, that's very good. A little bit funny, I guess. We also have this. I'm not a decision maker. That's because I'm not good at apologizing. Yeah. So I'm not a decision maker. That's because I'm not very good at apologizing. And then finally we have, wasn't an easy decision for me to make. Lots of coin tossing went into it. Yes. Who relies on flipping the coin to make their decisions? Not a great idea. And then finally we have some of the bad decisions. And nothing is more difficult and therefore more precious than to be able to decide. That was Napoleon Bonaparte. Good quote. Yeah, making a decision, being able to make decisions is a vital key part of being the people that we are. Now, there are some bad decisions that people have made. I'll just lose this for you and put me back on. How do I do that? Da, da, da. I do apologise for the interruptions there. I just need to get back so I can see the screen. You can still see me. Great, brilliant, good news. So let's look at some of the bad decisions that have been made over the years. So these aren't so much bad decisions as fortunate or lucky decisions. So Teddy Roosevelt saved his own life by putting his speech in his breast pocket. So he was well known for the brevity of his speeches, but he decided he was going to make a particularly long speech and then deliver that to the Senate. After he had finished his speech, he put the speech into his pocket, which was some 50 pages long. That's a long speech, isn't it? Yeah, but he put that into his breast pocket, And so when he was shot en route to the Senate, he was saved by that speech. Very lucky man. Buddy Holly. So you can all remember he died in a plane crash along with many other famous people. The whole reason they were on that plane was because he had decided that they wanted to get to their destination that bit earlier, and therefore they hired a plane to get there. That plane, as we know, then crashed. So again, not great. Then another decision, this was something I was doing my research, I hadn't heard of this, but apparently the nuclear attacks on Japan at the end of World War II, there was a third one that was planned. And that third one flew over a village called, or a town called Kokura. But the pilot decided there were too many clouds, and therefore he was not going to drop his bomb. So Kokura was saved because of some clouds and the decision made by that particular pilot. So very lucky town, very lucky town. So let's look at bad decisions. So I've made some pretty bad decisions in my lifetime. So I can think of one when I was much, much younger. It's about 40 years ago, actually, when I was 18. I was working in a pub as a barman, and there were a couple of lads who run a disco there every week. And when they were running the disco, we got on pretty well. And they, on the side, had opened up a video rental shop. All very new back then, 40 years ago. It was VHS and Betamax, if you can recall. They decided that they would come to me and ask me to go and run the shop for them because they were very busy doing their discos and couldn't really be in two places at once. So they said to me, look, you come and run this shop. It's the first of two that we're buying. You come and run this shop and we'll give you a 50% share of the shop and we'll obviously pay you. So I thought, yeah, okay, fine. Some of you are having some problems with the sound, I'm told. Is that the case? Yeah, so can everybody see me and can everybody hear me? Oh, yeah, so some can and some can't. Thanks, Verena. Okay. Hi, Mary. Okay, so I had the opportunity of taking over this shop, running it for them, and having a 50% share of the benefits of the shop, which I declined. 4 years later, Blockbusters arrived on the scene. These two friends of mine had grown their business by 3 shops, so they now had 3 shops that they were selling. Blockbusters descended and paid them an absolute fortune for their 3 shops, one of which I could have been involved in. So that was not a great decision of mine. So let's just look at how we make decisions. We'll talk about this a bit more detail later, but let me just show you this now, if I can. So yes, I think can you all see this on the screen now? So we tend to make decisions in one of 2 ways, either in our unconscious mind on the left or in our conscious mind on the right. So our unconscious decisions tend to be fast, instinctive, obviously unconscious, everyday decisions. They're almost automatic. So they're the type of decisions where you come downstairs to get your breakfast, you grab the cereal, you pour the milk, you put the sugar on and you start eating. You don't recall having made any decisions by the time you sat down and finished that bowl of cornflakes. The second route is the conscious thinking, where you're making a slow decision, probably taking you a matter of hours or days. You're making more complex decisions and perhaps arguably more reliable decisions. And you tend not to make them in both these places at the same time. So your unconscious and your conscious thinking tends to be 2 different things. Yeah. So let me just get rid of that screen again for you. And you should now be able to see me once again. Yep. Okay. So we make decisions largely in our unconscious. We make about 3,500 decisions a day. Now, they reckon that teachers make about 15,000 a day. Quite how they manage to ramp it up that much, I don't know, but so they reckon. But if we reckon that's 3,500 messages a day, decisions a day, that's a lot of decision making. So most of that is going to be unconscious decision making. If we can't make a decision today on something that's a bit more nitty gritty, then will it be the same tomorrow? So if we have a problem today, well, let us say we are going to buy a new car, and we're thinking about that today, but we can't quite make our decision whether it's going to be a BMW or a Mercedes or a Lexus. Will that problem look the same tomorrow? No, chances are it won't, and it won't because our unconscious will have done some work on that overnight when our conscious mind has stopped thinking about it. Our conscious mind has to stop thinking about it because it closes down when we go to sleep, whereas our unconscious mind is constantly whirring away. So that decision won't look quite the same tomorrow because of the work done by your unconscious mind. So a big important decision about buying a car, perhaps getting married, having children, changing schools, selecting a school, etc. Those are decisions that are probably best left over a few days. Doing those, making those decisions are not snap decisions. You're not going to make them in 10 minutes. So using your unconscious knowingly can be quite an advantageous thing to do. Let's just also consider that some people are adverse to making decisions. So let's get technical for a minute. There is something called decidophobia, would you believe, which is a fear of decision making. So people with decidophobia do not have control over their lives. Their low self-esteem lowers their confidence and prevents them from making tough decisions about their life. That's not a great place to be, is it? So decidophobia is defined as the irrational fear of making decisions. That must be terrible. In its most extreme form, those who have this fear experience full-blown panic attacks when even thinking about having to make a decision. That would be dreadful. So persons with decidophobia often have a lack of control over the direction of their life. No big surprise. Problems such as low self-esteem can increase the level of a person's confidence. They find it next to impossible to face different choices and make right or correct, well-informed decisions. The mere thought of making decisions sends them into a panic. So the symptoms associated with decidophobia mimic those of other anxiety disorders. So it can be panic, avoidance, dizziness, nausea, shortness of breath, dry mouth, excessive sweating, etc., etc., as we well know. Yeah. There is also a disorder, would you believe, for being indecisive, slightly different to being willing to refuse making decisions, and that's called apolloumania, which is a Greek word. It's a mental disorder in which the patient displays pathological indecisiveness. Okay, let's move on from there. So if we look at ways in which we can make a decision, there are various ways in which we can make a decision. Now, NLP, which is the thing that I'm qualified in and I use every day in my work with children and adults and teachers, can be a very good source of finding methods that work for making decisions. So let me just quickly run you through a couple of these. So the first one, decision making is a key part of achieving better results. It's part of a virtuous system of information gathering, decision making, prioritizing, taking action and reviewing. So before we make decisions, the best thing to do is to get the very best quality information. So it doesn't really matter what that decision is, what it's about, but you want to get the very best information that you can have. So if it's about changing schools, you want to do your research on the schools. If it's about going out with a particular young man or young lady, you would want to perhaps talk to your friends, find out what they know about that person. Have a look at them on Facebook. I'm sure we've all done that, etc., etc. So you want to get good quality information before making a decision and saying, oh, excuse me, do you want us to go out for dinner? Yeah, etc. So the first part of the process is a discovery phase where you focus on getting this high quality information, and you really do want to get good quality information, and you want to get that from people whose opinion you respect. So you're not going to ask your boss about the girl down the corridor. You're going to ask perhaps someone else. You're going to talk to people that you know that person, and perhaps people even that you know yourself. Or you're going to talk to someone when it comes to a school, someone who sends their own child to that school and talk to them about the experiences that they've had. So you know you're talking to people who have got information that's going to be useful to you. It's a little point talking to someone whose child went to that school 10 years ago, because the school very likely will be very different today. So if they were in our position, what would they do? Very interesting question to ask them. So run this process for important decisions, and with practice you'll improve all your decision making, including the ones we make quickly. So this is the process you go through. You just consider the decision logically. Write and score all the positives and all the negatives about the decision. Write down your score between 0 and 10. A 10 means you would definitely do it, while 0, you definitely would not do it. So consider the decision now, rather than logically, consider the decision now emotively. So deal with your emotions. How strong are your feelings? What score would you give the decision emotionally? Once again, a 10 means you definitely do it, whereas a 0 means you wouldn't. Now consider the decision intuitively. Be silent. Do we have a small voice that adds anything to our logical and emotional thinking? What score would we give the decision intuitively? Once again, rank it from 1 to 10. Then add up these 3 scores, and if we still think the decision is a good idea, play a mental movie of implementing that decision. So actually run it through your mind. How will that decision look in practice? Actually picture your child at that school, or picture yourself out on that dinner date, and see what it looks like, see what it feels like. Hear what you can hear and feel what you can feel, and continue the movie until you've got the best results that you can. What's the impact on us, the people around us, and maybe even the environment that we live in? So having run that movie, assuming we still want to go ahead, consider any downside or risk going forwards. Is there something that could happen that's going to upset the apple cart? So is there a new school opening that's going to be fantastic? Is there a space coming up at the school that you initially wanted that you might be able to take advantage of? Is the young lady down the corridor who you're quite keen on popping the question to and saying fancy a dinner date, is she about to be moved to the Ipswich office? If so, you may want to consider that again. So think of those risks and run them through. Are they actually risks that you are happy to take, or are they risks that you don't want to take? Then you want to future pace this action and complete a timeline of reaching the very best results. So decide on the first small step to implement the decision. Imagine yourselves carrying out this action. Get yourselves associated in the very best emotional state to get the best result that you can get. Then imagine yourselves as an independent person. So I normally refer to the independent person as being Bill. And then coach yourselves to do it better. Repeat the imagine exercise and take into account that coaching. So if Bill says it's okay and you say it's okay, there's a strong chance that that's going to be okay. So that's one NLP method that you can use. The there are some others, but before we do that, I'm just going to tax your brains with some riddles. So, no need to make decisions on this, but you do have to think. So, how can you throw a ball as hard as you can and have it come back to you, even if it doesn't bounce off of anything? So there's nothing attached to it, nothing attached to this ball, and no one else catches it or throws it back. So what's happening to the ball? Answers, if you will, by text. No? Okay, let me tell you then. So that ball is being thrown straight up in the air. So obviously it's not being thrown back to you. It always comes back to you because it's coming straight back down, and you can throw it as hard as you like. So yes, okay. Let's consider a man who lives on the 10th floor of a block of flats. He always takes the elevator down to the first floor every morning and goes to work. In the evening, when he comes back on a rainy day, or if there are other people in the elevator, he goes to his floor directly. Otherwise, he goes to the 7th floor and walks up 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. Can you explain why? So I'll read that again. A man who lives on the 10th floor takes the elevator down to the 1st floor every morning and goes to work. In the evening, when he comes back on a rainy day, or if there are other people in the elevator, he goes to his floor directly. Otherwise, he goes to the 7th floor and walks up 3 flights of stairs to his apartment. Why? When you know the answer, it really is quite straightforward. So the answer is, this man is a short man. He can't reach the upper elevator buttons, but he can ask people to push them for him. And when it's raining and he's got his brolly with him, he can use the umbrella to push the buttons. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Let's look at another method that NLP also could use, or you could use. So I'm just going to read you a quick passage from a story, really, of the person that's going through this process. Yeah. So I've owned 18 different cars since I was 16 years old. That's a different car every couple of years. After about a year, I get bored with the car, or I realize it doesn't meet my needs because I didn't give consideration to what my needs really were at the time of the purchase. I love cars, but I'm just too impulsive. Because of this, I'm not allowed to car shop anymore without a plan. A few months ago, I set out to purchase a car once again. I narrowed down the search to a few options, but my other half and I went to the dealerships, and after the first dealership, I started expanding my choices and going up in price, as you did. Oh yeah, I just about made that work for my budget. Yeah, and you know how it is. You see a car, and then they try to upsell it to you, so your budget creeps up a little, and then you go to the next car dealership and see something else is just a little bit higher than where you had just reset your budget to, and so it goes on. And you start with a new budget until finally you end up at a BMW dealership when you're originally looking at something much less expensive than that. Yeah. So I got back in my car and decided I just don't make good decisions when it comes to cars, and I want this pattern to stop. So I spoke to my partner and we talked, and we decided to employ the NLP decision-making strategy. Yep. So we decided to use a concept called VAK. VAK stands for visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. For those of you not sure what kinesthetic means, that's really your touch or feel sense. When we implement these 3 senses into our decisions, we tend to make better decisions. and let me tell you how this young person did this. So first, my partner asked me the first thing I do when I make decisions about cars. I told him that I look at the car. How it appears is my first consideration. That's the visual. Then he asked what the second thing is. I said how the engine sounds. I quite like that throaty growl, hence why I love sports cars, especially BMWs. Well, that's auditory. So we've now got the visual and we've got the auditory. I thought about what my kinesthetic sense may lead to. I couldn't really think of anything. I don't think about how the steering wheel feels, or I don't really feel the texture of the leather on the seats. Nothing. I also don't really consider how I feel about this car in a few months. So there's nothing really kinesthetic that I could put my finger on. So we had to think of a different way to bring the kinesthetic mode into the decision-making process. So we came up with using a piece of paper with a list of requirements on it. This would be something that I could hold onto and carry with me. And this list had everything that would have to be checked if I were to buy a car. So the next 3 dealerships we went to, I held onto my list. I physically carried it with me. Both of those obviously are kinesthetic actions. So if a particular car didn't meet the requirements on the list, I walked out. This was particularly hard at the Lexus dealership, I found, but I walked away anyway. It felt good to do that. I felt more grounded to have the list in my hand. It took longer than usual, but I finally found the right car that met each requirement. And that feeling has lasted for a long time. I love my new car. The idea of having this list that I hold and follow probably sounds obvious, but the most obvious things don't occur to us in the areas where we're struggling. We all have areas that cause us to make poor decisions. Could be eating, arguing, motivation, or in any big area we have to make a difficult decision. The NLP idea is that we incorporate VAK into our decision-making process. We may be able to make better decisions because we're more integrated in our thinking. So that's the VAK NLP model for making decisions. Yeah. So let's just look at where we are now. So we're now yes. So let's just look at whenever you have to make a decision between 2 alternatives and have all the information that you need, but still can't make a decision, perhaps try to do the following. So decide to commit yourself to one of the alternatives. You've got 2, and notice what your response is. Sometimes it'll be, yeah, that feels right. I'm very comfortable with that decision. While at other times it'll be, no, I'm not really comfortable with that. No, I'm going to try the other one. And you can switch to that other decision and try that on for a period of time. Either way, you would have moved out of indecision into action, because either you'll commit to the one that feels right, or you'll swap and go to the second one. And if that doesn't feel right, then maybe you need to be looking at a third decision. So the general principle is to validate all the different aspects of your functioning, making it much easier to decide between the many opportunities available to you and make choices that are satisfying. Because making that right choice, making that choice that you feel comfortable with, does feel satisfying. Okay. So we've done that. So let's just look at what a good decision is. So a good decision is something that we feel comfortable with, but there are trade-offs to make, isn't there? So if I say to you, look, we're going to flip a coin, and if I win, you give me £1. but if you win, I'll give you £10. Well, that's a fairly easy decision to make. You're going to win £10 every time you get it right, and I'm only going to win £1 every time I get it right. So unless I'm using a dodgy coin, let's assume I'm not, I'm going to lose a lot of money to you, and you're going to win a lot of money from me. So taking that bet would be good news. But if I said to you, look, each time you win, you'll get £2, and each time I win, you'll give me £1. We are programmed to be much less likely, because that risk of loss features greatly in our decision-making process, and we'll just not go for that. That's not a big enough return for us to be interested. It's a little bit like saying there's no such thing as a free lunch. So if you're going to eat a great big fillet steak, you've got to give up the chance of eating a hamburger, which is okay. I'd rather have a steak than a hamburger most times. But if you choose to eat the hamburger, you're giving up a great steak. But what if you decide to have the ribeye steak? Well, then you've got to give up the fillet steak and the hamburger. That's not quite so good. Or is it? Do I particularly like the ribeye steak? In which case, that's fine. Yeah. But to make a decision to do something or to have something means you've got to give up on something else very often. So what are you willing to give up in each moment for something else? What's worth giving up in each moment for something else? What is the something else that's worth pursuing? So if we agree that everything is a trade-off, which it is, then a good life means making good trades. It means getting a lot of benefit for whatever costs we give up. The problem is we tend to be awful at assessing what we're giving up and what we're gaining from our decisions. In fact, I've had my fair share of problem decisions where I clearly didn't understand the costs. So what we're gaining is a constant struggle. So let's look at a couple of other good decision processes. So a good decision is risking little for the opportunity to gain a lot. That generally is the rule of a good decision. Risking little to gain a lot. So having to give me £1 each time I win, and you getting £10 each time I win. Yeah, that's a good deal. That's a good decision to play that game. So a good decision might include striking up a conversation with someone you find interesting or attractive, asking a potentially embarrassing question, spending 10 minutes meditating every day, filling out a job application for positions that are beyond what you'd likely achieve, starting a difficult conversation. Similarly, a bad decision is risking a lot for the opportunity to get little. So what is a little and a lot though? Well, that depends on what you value. And if you don't know what you value, then that's going to become pretty difficult. So if you're giving up your social life for a year worth continuing your education, depends how important the education is, isn't it? Okay. Do you value education? You don't. Okay. Well, then that's an easy decision. Yeah. So you need to know what your values are. Is buying a house worth living on a tight budget for the next 10 years? I would argue yes. There's many people in the current climate that would argue no. So you have to know what's important to you to make those decisions. And obviously, a good decision for me might be a terrible decision for you, and vice versa. It's why the world is so interesting, because we all have different values, different belief systems, and we're likely to make different decisions given the same circumstances. Our values determine how we measure the options in our lives. They are the yardsticks that determine the size of our costs and the size of our benefits when making our trade-offs. And if we don't know what yardsticks we're using, then we can't accurately determine what is good for us and indeed what's not. So people that suffer from indecision largely don't know what matters to them. So if you're an indecisive person, probably the best thing you could do would be to start considering what things you value. Because let us say that you're looking at this boy or girl down the corridor who might be open to going out on a date. If a new relationship isn't important to you because work is far more important, or you prefer taking your husky out for walks at the weekend and being with someone you might enjoy, then maybe that risk is not where you want to go. Yeah. So consider what your values are, what your beliefs are. Find your cause, find your values, and take action according to those. Good decisions tend to be difficult to make for some reason, even when they're obvious and we know they are good decisions. We will still struggle to make them. And conversely, bad decisions seem incredibly easy to fall into. Why do we knowingly do things that are risky and bad for ourselves? We struggle to get off our backsides to do one good thing. Why do we seem so stuck? So humans make bad decisions because we're inherently terrible at objectively assessing risks and rewards. That's just not something we do well. So we can't escape those things. The best we can do is gain an awareness of them and act appropriately. So let's just look at the psychological failures and put them into three categories. So those categories are the influence of our emotions. So we can start allowing our emotional thoughts leak into our decision-making process. Not a great idea. Our poor perception of time. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail in a moment. There's some quite interesting things I can give you there. And the seduction of social status. So if making a decision is going to increase our social status, we will probably lean towards making that decision. If we feel it will lessen our social status, there's a strong likelihood we'll pour cold water on that particular decision. So let's just look at those. So how our emotions derail our decision making. So think back to some of the most stupid decisions that you've ever made. Just have a think. Yep, chances are most of those decisions were motivated by you being an emotional wreck at that time. Maybe you were angry, you were in a fit of rage, you smashed your keyboard against the desk. Who knows? Yeah, but maybe you were so sad from a breakup and you were just not in a great place. So your emotions really impacted, hijacked your sense of reality, and something that is clearly a good decision feels like a horrible, scary decision instead. So what's a terrible idea draws us in with an irresistible force until we wake up and think, how did that happen? How did I think that was a good idea? Secondly, if we look at our perception of time, there's an interesting economics experiment where if you offer people £100 today or £150 a year from now, most people will take the £100 today. Okay. In economics, this is known as temporal discounting. And we discount the value of having something far off in the future compared to having something now. Yeah, I get that. It's often referred to as the present bias, and you see it crop up in all sorts of areas. So we would rather eat double pepperoni pizza every Saturday night than think about the weight we'll gain a year from now. As someone who's just given up smoking, I get that, because I smoked for years, not thinking about my health in the future. if I could still get out of bed tomorrow and do what I needed to do, then that was fine. Never mind the fact that I might then struggle to walk for an hour with my dog because of the smoking I've done. Yeah, so later that came into play. So we'd rather be right in an argument than think about how we might be affecting a friendship a week, a month, or a year into the future. We'd rather have fun tonight than think about how we're going to feel at work tomorrow with that hangover. So we tend to overestimate the value of something now, and this is why people are terrible at saving money. We procrastinate about important tasks, and this is why we put off having necessary but difficult conversations. So there's other ways in which time messes us up as well. So think about this. So take a penny and put it on the first square of a chessboard. Now put 2 pennies on the next square. Now put 4 on the next square, and so on. And continue doubling the pennies for all 64 squares on the board. So how much money is on that last square? Would you be surprised to know that it is $92.2 quadrillion? Sorry, pounds. Huge amount, yeah. But let's be honest, probably most of us said a large number, something generically large, like maybe 5 million, maybe 10 million. Meanwhile, our minds are poor at compounding things over time. We overestimate the pain of doing something for 30 minutes a day. So if you tell me I need to work out for 30 minutes a day, every day, I'll be going, that's too much pain. Without realizing or understanding or appreciating the compounding effects it can have if we fail to do it every day for months and months on end. So for example, let's pretend there's an imaginary skill that if you practice for 30 minutes a day, you'd get 1% better every day for the next year. Let's say you actually did practice for 30 minutes a day. How much better would you be at the end of the year? So you're probably thinking 365 days in a year, so 400% maybe. If you're more familiar with the way compounding maths works, you might say something like 1,000% maybe. Yeah. But the real answer, the real shocker is you're going to do 30 minutes a day and get 1% better each day for the next year. How much better are you going to be at the end of the year? Well, you're going to be 38 times better, 3,778% better. That's staggering, isn't it? They're really big numbers. 38 times better by the end of the year for doing that thing 30 minutes a day. So we might say, oh, what's the big deal? What if I miss one workout? That's not a big deal. I just missed one. It's not going to kill me. Then we proceed to say that once or twice a week for years and years. And because we don't think exponentially, because we don't, our intuition thinks linearly, we vastly underestimate how much we're actually giving up. Because if you only practice that skill every other day, so instead of every day, you're now going to do it every other day for a year. But at the end of that year, you'll be 611% better. Well, that's a stark difference to 3,778% better, isn't it? Massive difference. Yeah. So our brains don't think exponentially. It strikes us as counterintuitive. We're not good at doing that. We tend to vastly overestimate the short-term benefits of taking a day off, or skipping practice, or not committing to one of our commitments. Missing one workout isn't a big deal. And you're right, it really isn't that big a deal. But we don't consider the fact that just one workout isn't a big deal when repeated every week or even every other week for a couple of years, that can have a massive, a drastic effect on the results that we will then get. We also then have our perceptions. So how our perceptions are easily influenced by status. So it's almost as though we're handicapped in some way, being at the mercy of our emotions, struggling to properly value things in the future. But the truth is that for most of human evolution, these were not the handicaps, but the benefits of our minds. So 50,000 years ago, out in the desert, you wouldn't consider whether something would be more valuable a year from now or not. No, you had to kill that great big animal, that wildebeest or whatever it was, or be killed by it. Yeah. That's all that mattered. You needed to be concerned with the present. You didn't consider, oh, if I kill too many of these, there might not be many left by the end of the year, or 5 years, or 10 years. That wasn't a consideration. You needed to eat now, you killed. So similarly, we have biases and prejudices around social status as well. This is because thousands of years, despite our best efforts, humans self-organized into status hierarchies, with the few reaping the most resources and opportunities at the top, and everyone else scrounging for the leftovers. So, I know, you'll do it in a minute. No, life doesn't wait. Neither should you. Now, I know what you're saying. I don't care about no status hierarchies. I'm my own man. I do what I want. I won't be swayed by silly social markers. Well, that's nice, but you're wrong, because you will be. Yeah. The fact is, we are all subconsciously affected by what we perceive as valuable and socially desirable in others. It's automatic. It colors our perceptions. It skews our emotions. When in the presence of extreme beauty, wealth, or power, we all become a little bit dumber, a little bit more passive, a lot more insecure. Just think of Donald Trump. Yeah, how he had that effect on countless people around him, and they were then ready to do his bidding. Yeah, not great. So we tend to give too much credit to people we perceive have a social effect, they have a social status, they have a social weight. This is known as the halo effect, and it's our tendency to assume that physically attractive people are smarter or nicer than they actually are, that successful people are more interesting than they actually are, that powerful people are funnier or more charismatic than they actually are. So think about all of those stars, those attractive people, those funny people that are doing adverts for health supplements, clothes, beauty products, skincare, weight loss, etc. Think about how former presidents and heads of state get paid £500,000 just for turning up into a room, for goodness sake. Think about how you've convinced yourself that you like different clothes, different food, different music, because somebody you really respect or admire likes them. We all do it. It's impossible not to. So my favourite brand of clothing is Raging Bull. Why? Designed by a rugby player. Yeah, hats off. I like rugby players. I like rugby. Yeah, of course I wear them. It's, you know, like I said, we're all monkeys, really. Yeah. So the best we can do is be aware of how we are influenced and notice how we react around people we deem as particularly successful or admirable. Notice how much more agreeable we become, and notice how we tend to make positive assumptions about them. Then question these things. Ask yourself, if some random person I know said this, would I react the same way? And if you're honest with yourself, you'll find that sometimes, if not most times, the answer is actually no. So, how do we make better decisions? Let's take a look at making better decisions. Again, let me just find my notes. So it's important to understand that all decisions involve emotions. So we've just talked about the influence that they have. We can't stop those emotions playing into those decisions, but let's understand the importance of them. Yeah. So sometimes we make decisions rationally and logically. As we've said, there's hundreds, there's thousands of decisions we make every day. And we don't do a logical think through of every one. That would just be impossible, because logical thinking requires the conscious mind, and we can't think through 3,500 decisions, or for a teacher, 15,000 decisions every day. That's just not practical, is it? We'd be sat there forever. Yeah. So the big decision when we think we're being logical shows that most of our decisions, big or small, are made unconsciously. And if they're made unconsciously, they're going to involve our emotions. So let's look at this. Most of our decisions are made unconsciously. Okay. So I'm quite happy with my breakfast cereal being chosen unconsciously. I'm quite happy with my choice of restaurant being made unconsciously. But I'm not quite so happy with my car being chosen unconsciously. I want to think I'd be a bit more logical about that. So just have a thought for a moment. What are you happy allowing your unconscious brain to decide for you? Maybe there's things you do that you don't actually like doing. Maybe there's things that you would like to do a different way. Okay, fine. So maybe you consider getting that decision-making process back into the logical brain, the conscious brain, and reconsider some of those choices that your unconscious brain is making for you. So when you're looking at brain activity, researchers can predict what choice people will make 7 to 10 seconds before they themselves are even aware of having made a decision. This means that even when people are making a conscious, logical decision, chances are they aren't aware they've already made a decision and it was done unconsciously. So we're not even aware of our own process, because what happens in the unconscious mind, we're not aware of because it's unconscious. Yeah. So when we're making the decision, we often aren't aware of that process. And if you can't feel emotions, then you can't make decisions. So we get into a bit of the science bit here. So forgive me if I misspeak on some of these words. So thanks to our ventromedial prefrontal cortex, or VMPFC. That's going to really catch on, isn't it? Not. Yeah. It's important in regulating fear. Other parts of your brain, in particular the amygdala, I told you, yeah, the amygdala, other parts of your brain, in particular the amygdala, tell you when you should be afraid and what you should be afraid of. My apologies for murdering that word. This is where conditioned fear responses are born. The VMPFC, in contrast, has an opposite role. It mitigates conditioned fear. So it stops you from continuing to be afraid in certain situations. So when it is active, then you're able to let go of conditioned fears. And as a result, you're then able to make a decision. So you should just assume that all decisions involve emotions, rather than just making logical arguments to persuade. You're more likely to persuade people to take an action if you understand how they are feeling about the decision and feed their feeling. So there's actually a neuron that fires up in the brain that triggers us to take action when the brain decides it is confident of a decision. This is subjective. It's not necessarily based on the amount of information you've collected. It's more a feeling of confidence. The brain's reached the point where it's confident that it's making the right decision. That's when that will fire off. So most of our mental processing is unconscious, and most of our decision making, therefore, is unconscious. But what that doesn't mean, that doesn't mean that it's faulty, irrational, or bad. So we are faced with a huge amount of data into our brain every second. So the figures written in front of me here are telling me it's 11 million. I've always been told that it was 9 million, but whichever that is, that's still a huge number of bits of information that are coming into your brain every second. And those are dealt with by the unconscious. The unconscious has evolved to process most of that data and to make decisions for us according to the guidelines and rules of thumb that are in our best interest most of the time. So this is the trusting your gut. And most of the time that does work. So for example, we learn at a young age, you don't run across the road. So what do we do as we get older? We don't run across the road. Yeah. I remember being told, make sure you eat up all your breakfast. Do I eat up all my breakfast? Yes, every single day. I never leave a bit. Yeah. Do I eat a healthy breakfast? No, but I do eat a breakfast every single day. So there's two different types of decisions that people will make. Those that are value-based decisions are made in the, here we go again, the orbitofrontal cortex, the OFC. So during times when you are really comparing the Honda to the Subaru when you're shopping for a car, you're making a value-based goal decision. Habit-based decisions occur in the basal ganglia, deep in the brain. So when you pulled your usual cereal off the shelf at the grocery store and put it in your cart, that's a habit-based decision. So you see those shredders, go, oh yeah, shredded, have them. Yeah. You see those Rice Krispies, go, oh yeah, I have them. You look at the cornflakes, go, nah, I don't really like cornflakes. Those are all habit-based decisions that you're making. What's interesting is that the OFC is quiet, then the habit part of the brain takes over. So if the OFC is quiet, the habit brain takes over. This means that people are either making a goal-directed decision or a habit decision, but not both at the same time. So you can't make a goal-directed decision out of habit. You make it because it's goal-directed. In the same way, you'll make a habitual decision not based on a goal. It's going to be based on habit, beliefs. And neither of those will impact on the other. You're either operating one or the other, not both. So if you give someone a lot of information, they will tend to switch from habit to goal. The reason being is that the habit isn't really suited well to dealing with lots of information. So if you want someone to make a habitual decision, don't give them too much information to look at. If you want them to make a goal-directed decision, then do give them lots of information. Give them lots of information to review. Yep. So let's just summarize some of that we've just done. So if someone is making a habit-based decision, do not give them lots of information. So if you know the person that you're talking to always orders steak in the restaurant, don't start telling them about the 15 different types of steaks that the restaurant sells, because that means they'll probably not choose steak. So provide people with a brief but logical reason for their decision, so they can use that to tell themselves and others why they did what they did. We feel more comfortable if we're able to justify our decisions. And limit the number of choices people have to make to 1, 2, or 3. If you provide too many choices, they probably won't choose. Yeah, they just won't choose anything at all. Yeah. Okay. So, are there any questions? Anybody want to ask anything? Hello. No. Okay, we'll move on then. Yeah. So let's look at some of the things that lead to terrible decisions. We'll then go on to the ways to make better decisions, and we'll then have a quick question and answer session at the end of that. So I would reckon we've probably got half an hour or so to go. Yeah, you okay with that? Cool. So, habits that lead to terrible decisions. Laziness. Yep, that's guaranteed to give you a terrible decision. Yeah, if you're lazy, you're not going to do the research, you're not going to do the thinking, you're not going to gather that additional quality information that you need. Laziness is a complete no-no when it comes to making decisions. Not anticipating unexpected events. So there are often unexpected events. So for example, you walk down the corridor to go and talk to this young lady, this young man who you've been admiring from afar, and you ask them out, only to find that they were asked out by the guy sat opposite them earlier that day. No way you could possibly have known that, but that's kind of queered the pitch for you without your knowing. So that would be an unexpected event. Yeah. Indecisiveness, we've talked about that. It's even got a scientific name. Decidophobia. So indecisiveness. So if you're indecisive, you're not going to make great decisions. Remaining locked in the past. Some people make poor decisions because they're using the same old data or processes that they've always done. And these people will tend to stick to the devil they know. So these people will get the same phone that they've always had, or perhaps they won't. They just stay with the phone that they've got. They won't buy a new phone at all. So they very much think it's better the devil you know. You've got overdependence. So some decisions are never made because one person is waiting for another, who in turn is waiting for someone else's decision. Effective decision makers find a way to act and do so independently when necessary. You've got isolation. If you are isolated, it's much more difficult to make a decision because you won't have access to that information. You won't have access to people that you can sound off. So isolation is not great when it comes to making decisions. A lack of technical depth. I read this and felt, I'm not sure about that in terms of a personal attitude. But I think having that basic knowledge to be able to tell whether an idea is brilliant or terrible, yeah, that would class itself as a lack of technical depth. So you do need to have some knowledge about the field in which you're trying to make a decision. Personal decisions you'll tend to have, but look at schools, for example. What is the results that a school is getting? How do you get access to those results? What are the indicators that you want to be looking at? Do you want to be listening to the Schoolgate gossip, or do you want to be listening to those reports? The latest Ofsted report will generally make some interesting reading, particularly when you've read a few of them and know how to read between the lines. So having that technical knowledge will have some benefits. Not having it will harm your decision-making process. Then a failure to communicate your decisions effectively to the people around you, because not being able to sell your decision is not great, because sometimes a decision needs to be sold because perhaps other people don't agree with that decision that you've made. So having the people around you on board will make a difference. Okay, so let's get on to the ways to make better decisions. So if you've got your pens and paper at the ready, you can jot these down. I'll be as brief as I can. So one, don't fear the consequences. So once you've made your decision, stick with it. Don't fear what the consequences are, because you should have already considered those during that decision-making process. And the fact that you've made that decision says that you're okay with those consequences, assuming that you fully thought them through. So once you've made that decision, those consequences should not be feared. Go with your gut instinct. So if in some way your knowledge is limited or the amount of information you can gather is limited, then trusting a bit more to your gut instinct is worthwhile. It carries an awful lot of weight. Consider your emotions. You might think that emotions are the enemy of decision making, but in fact they're integral to it, as we know. So our most basic emotions evolved to enable us to make rapid and unconscious choices in situations that threaten our very survival. Fear leads to flight or flight. Disgust leads to avoidance, and so on and so on. So yes, do consider your emotions. Play the devil's advocate. So if this is not something you're able to do for yourself, then get someone close to you or a good friend to play devil's advocate. Or maybe go and chat to that young lady, that young man down at the other end of the office and get them to be devil's advocate. Yep. So if you're having a conversation with someone and they're putting up all sorts of barriers, some of those are going to be barriers that you didn't consider for yourself. Well, that's a good thing, because that gets you the chance to look at them. And having that ability to think outside the square and think, I hadn't thought of that, yeah, is a good thing. So it will cause you to reconsider potentially what's going on. So look at it another way. So when you're considering a decision, look at it from someone else's position. Look at it from perhaps your partner's decision when it comes to schooling. Perhaps when you're looking to change jobs, look at it from perhaps your outgoing or ingoing boss's point of view. Just think of that problem, think of that issue that you're trying to resolve, and look at it from somewhere different. Doesn't matter too much where you go in terms of what position you take to look at it in a different way, but do look at it in a different way. Remember that the way something is framed, by that I mean the way it's said or presented, is going to have quite an impact in terms of how it's perceived. So make sure that your framing of that decision is the correct one. So make sure you're very comfortable with that. Beware social pressure. So you may think of yourself as a single-minded individual and not at all the kind of person to let others influence you. But the fact is, no one is immune to social pressure. We all suffer from social pressure. Even those of us who don't like to admit it, yeah, we still do suffer from social pressure. Yeah, social pressure. Just flicking through these. Don't let stress get the better of you. Yeah. So if you're starting to stress about a decision, it's probably time to stop. And if you stop, you're really enlisting the help then of your unconscious mind, which would be a good thing, because your unconscious mind can whir away in the background and start thinking of that problem, those decisions, that decision in a different way. So you're thinking of the issue, you can't find an answer, fine, stop thinking about it. Yeah, just switch off, go and have a game of pool, go and play football, go and go a long walk, do something just to clear your mind so that your brain can engage in the unconscious mind, and the unconscious will just whir away. So when you've gone away, you've had a good night's sleep, all the bits that you've done with your conscious mind have now been passed across to your unconscious mind. Those will get processed overnight, and the chances are you'll be able to look at that problem in a different way tomorrow. Always weigh the pros and cons. There's going to be pros and cons with every decision. Always make sure you've got a list of those in front of you, plus on one side, minus on the other side. Do a list. Yeah, it's surprising how many people don't do that, even with regards to some fairly basic decisions. So, for example, my wife and I will often argue over who we use for our electric bill or who we use for our gas bill. And we both have an attitude where we look at it in a very different way. So I would rather go for someone who is giving me a reasonable saving today and they're fixing their rate for a reasonable period of time. Whereas my wife wants just the cheapest. What you tend to find is that yes, you can get cheap for 6 months, but then you're on the other rate, then the price is going up. So you end up paying more over a couple of years, say. Yeah. So an argument we constantly have. Do be aware of what your goals and values are. If you're not sure what they are when it relates to a particular decision, then you really do need to give some time to just thinking that through. What are your core values? What are your core goals? Consider all the possibilities. So why not have a brainstorming session with yourself? Yep. Sit there with a pen and paper and just think of everything and chuck it all down on paper. So you get every possible aspect of that decision-making process down on paper, and you can then start striking through those that are not relevant, those that you don't want to give any weight to, but it really allows you to do a mind dump and just get everything out onto paper, which is going to help you with that decision-making process. Do plan how you tell others, as I've already said. And that, my dear friends, is your list of how to make good decisions. So let's just look at some other things. So it's a very good saying that I hear very often, actually. So whether you decide you can or you can't, you'll be right. That's an anonymous quote. So whether you decide you can or you can't, you're right. Yeah. If you chase 2 rabbits, both will escape. If you chase 2 rabbits, both will escape. And let's just have a look. There's a final quote here I think I want to give you. Let me just see. No, it's not that one. Yes, here we go. So I'll just share my screen with you for a moment. Yes, I think you can see my screen, I think. Yes, okay. So Theodore Roosevelt said, in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The worst thing you can do is nothing. So in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing. So it's effectively saying that even some decision is better than no decision. And that's a very good thing to remember when you're pondering, thinking about that decision. Okay, so so let's stop my screen. You can now see me, or hopefully you can. And let me just ask if there are any questions. Anybody, anything they would like to ask? No? Okay, that's absolutely fine. Let me just say to you that this was the first of a number of sessions. There are lots more sessions. You can sign up for as many of them as you wish. You don't even have to attend. You can just sign up and then the recording will get sent to you some days later. So if 8 till 10 is not a great time for you, don't worry too much, and you can just sign up and then that recording will come out to you. So if there's no questions, I'm going to finish slightly early and love you and leave you. Okay, I shall love you and leave you all. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks. Cheerio. Bye-bye.